I don't think Joe needs any more introduction. I think we need to finish what we've started. So we've outlined what the markets look like. We've gotten a great update on the port projects and what's happening to put that infrastructure in place. And then when those port projects are developed and they're commissioned, then the next step is essentially shipping 101, and we'll indulge, if you will, Joe to come back and help us with, now we've got ports, we've got infrastructure, we've got coal, we've got customers, we've got markets, and we need to put coal in a ship. Joe?
Okay, thanks again, Everett. I'll try to keep this brief. I know there was one more presentation after mine, and then there's lunch. So at a real high level, I like to think about shipping as sort of a logistics puzzle. I think Michael did a good job showing us how complicated it is, the entire logistics pipeline to get PRB coal to market. But it's just remarkable that the extraction here in Wyoming is just one small piece of getting that product onto a vessel like this, which is a Cape-size vessel. We'll talk about vessel sizes in a moment, but a Cape-size vessel can handle about 150,000 deadweight tons of cargo. So this is one of the larger vessels plying in the trade. But then if you consider the rail haul for the producers to a West Coast port, the terminal piece where it has to be handled again and loaded onto a vessel like this, then the ocean freight to get it to the demand center, it's extremely competitive, quite complex, and explains why the margins are very thin in this business. And I would just underscore what Michael said. Perhaps the key takeaway is just this is an extremely competitive business. So we'll talk a little bit about vessel sizes, the dry bulk index, what's happening with the fleet capacity, which will explain why the index is so low right now. Look at the prospects in the medium term for that to recover. And then I've got a sort of a geeky glossary of terms at the end that we won't go through, but as this presentation should be made publicly available, you can look at some of the key terms I identified. So as already has been outlined, the coal market is a global industry. It's highly competitive. There's 50 countries at least engaged in the extraction of commercial coal. It's growing by about 7% a year. So global, efficient, competitive, and growing, as I mentioned, by about 7% a year. It's actually quite easy to transport coal. It can be done by barge, rail, or vessel. But what's really important here for the seaborne component is to note that in 2013, about 1.3 billion tons of coal were shipped by sea. That represents only 16% of the total global coal consumed. So what we're saying is basically 84% of the coal that's used today is essentially used in the country in which it's extracted, or perhaps has a short cross-border rail. Australia is the world's largest seaborne exporter of met coal. Met coal is used to produce steel. And Indonesia, as Michael explained, is the world's largest seaborne exporter of thermal coal, which produces electricity. As I mentioned, coal can be transported by a variety of modes. It depends on where the demand center it needs to get to. Here in the US, coal is moved by rail and barge predominantly. There are some cases where coal is moved by truck. It can actually be moved in pipeline. It can be made into a slurry with water and transported through pipeline. But for the purposes of this presentation, we'll focus on the transport of the ocean-borne component. Typically, there's 3 vessel sizes that are engaged in the trade. There's the Handymax size, which, as you can see, is up to about 50,000 deadweight ton. There's the Panamax size, so-called because it can precisely fit through the dimensions of the existing canal locks, which are 1,000 feet long by 100 feet wide. And so anything bigger than that would be post-Panamax or Cape size. Cape size is anything 80,000 deadweight ton and above. Just to give you an idea of the economics of using larger ships, we talked about the thin margins, the competitive industry. So using Cape-size vessels is an extremely important driver, and it's about 22% less in terms of shipping costs using a Cape-size vessel for coal than using a Panamax size. Excuse me. The seaborne market is essentially divided into 2 regions. You have the Atlantic trade or the European trade, which is mostly serviced with U.S. coal from from the Appalachia region, and that, of course, goes to Germany, the UK, Spain, other European countries as well, and then the Pacific market, which I'd like to focus on here, which Michael has very well documented the key players in that market. Just a brief recap of the vessel size. You can see there that handy size, handy max, there's two terms, up to about 50,000 deadweight ton, just to give you some perspective to lay out how much bigger we get as we move up the chain between the Supermax or the Panamax than anything over 80,000 deadweight ton, which would not fit through the Panama Canal locks, is considered post-Panamax. Some large post-Panamax vessels are referred to as baby capes. In our mind, they're all sort of cape size because they need to go around one of the capes because they're too large to transit the locks. The vessel mix for our project would be about 30% cape and about 70% Panamax. It depends on the market, but that's sort of what we're planning for in terms of our berth structure and the permit filings. You can see that there's new vessels called VLOCs, very large ore carriers, which can even go up to 220,000 deadweight ton. Perhaps the most important metric to look at when considering ocean freight and the competitiveness is the Baltic Dry Index. The BDI, as we call it, is essentially a pricing index looking at 23 routes, 4 vessel sizes for all dry bulk commodities shipped globally. And it's tracked on a daily basis. It includes shipment not just of coal, but other dry bulk commodities. And unfortunately, today, in June of 2015, the index is at a 30-year low. And I'll explain some of the factors as to why that's happening. But the key driver is, like the coal market is oversupplied, the vessel market is grossly oversupplied. Too many ships were built, ordered, that couldn't be canceled before the boom, continued to be built after the boom, and analysts basically say the market is still about 20% oversupplied. This gives you a picture of how grim things are in terms of the BDI. You can see that it was at about 11,000, 10 or 11,000 in 2007, went back to about 11,000. This is in dollars, again, in about 2008. And today, it is at about $600, down from a high of 11,000. If you compare that to the Dow, which is now at a record high, it would be like saying the Dow is at 3,000, to put it into perspective. So huge fluctuations within the index. And it's, just to note and state the obvious that the producers here in Wyoming, they have no control over these things, right? They have no control over oil prices. They have no control over charter rates. They have no control over the demand side. And this is sort of underscores some of the challenges that they face today. I mentioned the fleet capacity. What happened, you can see the red line looks at the number of ships, the blue line, the deadweight ton on the left side. There's been a 40% increase since 2010 on the vessels. So there's 40% more vessels plying the trade in 2015 than there was in 2010. But very interestingly, there's been a 67% increase in capacity. Why? Because larger ships are being built predominantly rather than the Handymax that we discussed, or even the Panamax size, to leverage the economies of scale. Charter companies, producers, and shippers would like to use Capesize. So you have fewer vessels that are larger coming on, and that explains why you have a 67% capacity increase in terms, 67% capacity increase. So utilization is very low right now. You have too many vessels competing after the same dry bulk cargoes. You can see on the right side chart that at the peak of the market, the vessels were about 95% utilized. Today, you can see in about 2014, 2015, it was about 65%. According to Goldman Sachs, this overcapacity situation will continue, and it will come up maybe to about 70% by 2018. Like Michael was urging the coal producers to show some discipline, The charters, the shipbuilders, they need to figure out how to not bring on so much capacity in the coming years. As you can see, at least through 2018, there'll be low utilization. The left-hand chart shows the total cost, including freight and fuel from China to from Australia to China for coal. In about 2009, that was $20, and now you can see in 2015, it's probably about $7.50. So with plummeting fuel prices, certainly a good time to run a ship, but with the price of coal where it's at, you simply can't get the price you need to take advantage of low fuel prices and low charter rate prices given the overcapacity. As I mentioned, I would keep it brief. I won't go through all of these. I would just point out that SSA Marine, it's important to note, we're not a ship owner. We don't operate ships. We are the stevedore there. We're the company that is basically engaged in providing the loading and unloading services at the terminal. So we do that for containers, we do that for dry bulk, we do that for cruise ships, we do that for ro-ro, which is roll-on, so cars. So our piece of it is really the terminal side. As I mentioned at the outset, there's 4 main components to the pricing structure of getting PRB coal from here to the demand centers. You've got the extraction cost, you've got the rail cost to the port, you've got the terminal piece, which is us, the stevedore, and then you've got the charter or the vessel voyage across the ocean. And I think Michael indicated we need to be at about, did you say $100 would be optimal for PRB? In time to come, no, yeah, I mean in Newcastle today is at about $58, $59, so there's a long way to go for the price of coal to recover, but we're optimistic it will do so. The overcapacity on the daily charter, that should hopefully work itself out as well, but clearly there's very significant headwinds facing PRB exporters, not to mention the regulatory headwinds we discussed in the project briefs, but these macroeconomic trends also face, or I should say pose serious concerns as well. So as I mentioned, I'll keep it brief so that we can get to the next presentation, but if there's a question or two, I would be happy to respond.
Well, Joe, thank you. Edward, do you have any questions?
Just one final comment. Thank you, Joe. Again, we'll finish the way we started. Lloyd, thank you for the invitation. To the board, thank you for giving us the time. Hopefully this has been instrumental and helpful in broadening everybody's understanding of what these markets are and what these projects look like. A personal thank you to all of the panel members. I think you've gotten a good understanding of how deeply involved they are in these issues and what an understanding. To Michael Mewing, to Bill Chapman, and to Joe Ritzman. Thank you very much.
Let's give these guys a hand again.